Thank you. So good morning. I'm so glad to be with you here today. And here we are. Some of us gathered at this lovely Fridley Community Center. Others are online from places near and maybe far away. Wherever we may call home, I want to invite us this morning into a sense of place. The ways that place connects us to generations before us and generations to come, the realness and the transience of space and place. Robin Wall Kimmerer, an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation and author of Braiding Sweetgrass, writes that to be native to a place, we must learn to speak its language. So let's go into some exploration and deepening into place. And I want to start with where I live. So I don't live that far away from Reverend Laura in St. Paul. As I came back the other day from walking my dog, probably with her because we walk every week in the morning, I was walking my dog Marvin and I noticed something new in front of my house. Facing the south, the spring sun had melted the snow closest to the building, and there I saw some skinny, pointed green foliage of dwarf irises, reticulata. I don't know yet if they're the eye catchers or the spot-on varieties. That's what I planted. I'm hopeful the prairie dropseed grass that I moved along the foundation area last fall survived. I still need to cut down all of those dried stalks of the native plants that I keep up throughout the winter. Most, though, are still buried in a foot at least or more of snow. In this early spring following a winter of record snowfall, we have to look and listen carefully for those little signs of awakening. We learn to speak a place's language when we pay attention to these precise moments, these moments that are immediately before us and beyond the artificial and arbitrary constructs of time. For what really is time to a place? Time is always moving, and it's moving at a scale that is uniquely relative. For what is time to a rock, a boulder, to moving water, to that drop seed prairie grass that I planted? And the history of a place exists beyond all time. It reminds us, it teaches us, it urges us not to repeat. It roots us in who we are, in relationship, in reciprocity. Back in February, I went to a film screening of a movie called Oyote, and it told the story of the No DAPL movement, the Dakota Access Pipeline movement. And I know there are people here that have been deeply involved in DAPL as well as the Line 3 movement to stop that pipeline. We were led in discussion by Jennifer Martell of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, who is a producer and a story supervisor on this film. And she told us, an audience of mostly white people, that our work is to get down to bare bones, to know who we are, to know our history. This is an awakening as well, a reckoning that can be found oftentimes rooted in place. A short bike ride from my home brings me to Fort Snelling, which sits on the bluff of Bedote, which means meeting place of rivers. This is a place, Bedote, which is the confluence of the Mississippi and the Minnesota rivers. For the Dakota people, this location is a sacred place of creation. On the Sacred Sites tour that is offered by Jim Bear Jacobs and the Minnesota Council of Churches and Healing Stories of Minnesota, have people been on the Sacred Sites tour before? A few nods of heads here in the space. I really encourage you to look out for that, and I'll make sure that Reverend Laura knows if there's another one offered that I am aware of. It is a remarkable experience of going with Reverend Jim Bear, to these sites, including Fort Snelling, including Mendota, this mound in Mendota. These are places that are embedded in the Twin Cities, but also have a long history and connection to the Dakota people who have been here, of course, for generations and generations before us, the original stewards of this land. And as part of the Sacred Sites Tour, we go down into Fort Snelling State Park, what is known as Fort Snelling State Park. And this is also the place of the Dakota internment camp, where more than 1,600 women, children, and elders were held around the time of the Dakota Sioux Uprising. A concentration camp, an internment camp at the base of Fort Snelling, at the site of Bedote, at the site of this sacred place of creation. A beautiful site of waters and trees and cliffs. It is so gorgeous to be down there. And with this reckoning that we are invited to in place is this mixture of grief and truth-telling, of spiritual practices and relationship. It's an invitation into the complexity of history and place and human experience. And Robin Well Kimmerer invites us to explore what it means to be Indigenous, because immigrants cannot, by definition, be Indigenous. Indigenous is a birthright word. And so she invites us to consider instead that the task assigned is to strive to become naturalized to place, to throw off the mindset of the immigrant. Being naturalized to place means to live as if the land that feeds you, as if these are the streams from which you drink, that build your body and fill your spirit. To become naturalized is to know that your ancestors lie in this ground. Here you will give your gifts and meet your responsibilities. She writes, to become naturalized is to live as if your children's future matters, to take care of the land as if our lives and the lives of all of our relatives depend on it, because they do. I want to join Robin when she talks about standing by the river in my finest dress. I want to join her, and I want you to join as well in singing strong and hard and stomping our feet with hundreds of others so that the waters hum with our happiness. I want us to join her in dancing for the renewal of the world. To see the truths, to feel the grief and pain, to be responsible to history, to recognize that we humans are not in control, but we are in control of our relationship to one another and to the earth. And as Robin writes, relationship is the most authentic facet of restoration. Here is where our most challenging and most rewarding work lies, in restoring a relationship of respect, responsibility, reciprocity. Apologize, that word stumbles me every time. But the most important one is love. And what I am so excited to be part of, because I feel like we are at this moment here in the state of Minnesota to do this restoration of relationship, to reach into what our responsibilities are and how we can be love in the ways that we set policies and legislation. Can you imagine it? Policies and legislation can be our relationship of love that we're talking about today. Here before us in the state of Minnesota, we have an incredible budget surplus and a climate-led House, Senate, and Governor's office. What we have right now is an opportunity to address the inequality and climate change, which are the twin challenges of our time. And as Heather McGee says, more democracy is the answer to both. Last month, 400 people I know Kathy was there, and I hope others were as well, gathered at the Capitol for Rise and Repair, a rally for climate justice and Indigenous rights. We coordinated 35 legislative meetings, nearly 200 people called on elected officials to take bold action to protect our land, water, and all living creatures. We are in a climate crisis, and there is no denying the reality before us and the changes that must, without any shadow of a doubt, have to happen. And we do those changes in relationship. As Ashley Fairbanks said, there will be a transition, but it is up to us to ensure that this transition is just, that it happens in a way that honors Indigenous rights and sovereignty, that repairs harm and includes every single Minnesotan. So how do we do that? There's a coalition that includes the organization that I'm part of, Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, Honor the Earth, and other Indigenous and environmental groups. And together we have endorsed this legislative platform that puts Minnesota on the green road, one that will create a strong local renewable economy that supports vibrant Native and non-Native communities living in right relationship with the land. There are 5 broad categories of work that I'm going to describe to you super briefly. And these are areas that we see real opportunities for progress and change in this 2023 legislative session. And already here in March, some of those have come into being. Here are those 5 areas. The first one is reparations and sovereignty, which basically says that we must treat land and people as relatives to sustain, land and people. Their treatment as resources to extract harms all of us today. And that's how we so often do it. Natural resources are extractive. They are, how do they serve us as human beings? What if we flipped that and thought of them as relatives? Relatives. Earlier this month, Governor Walz signed the Indian Family Preservation Act, which requires that a Native child's family and tribe must be involved in adoption or foster placement decisions. This is an example of reparations and sovereignty in action. I was at the Capitol for the House vote. The Senate had already voted to pass this legislation, and it was up before the House. I was an invited guest of Indigenous elders and other Indigenous leaders, and we gathered in a room before proceeding to the House floor. I've never been part of this before. I've never witnessed a floor vote. We gathered, and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan offered sage, so we were smudged before entering in that space. Then we proceeded through the Capitol, the hallways, and we went up into, there's a gallery above the House floor where members of the public are able to observe the proceedings. You don't talk, you're not called or anything like that. You're there to bear witness. And we heard elected officials who are Indigenous speak and share their stories and share the harm and the hope that they have for how bills like this, strengthening bills like this, help to regain sovereignty. And it passed 128 to 0. Unanimous. I think it also was unanimous in the Senate, and then went on to Governor Walz to sign. It was the most beautiful, profound moment I've ever been able to witness. That is an example of legislation coming out of relationship. The second category within this platform is climate goals and truth-telling. You probably have already heard one of the first things that passed was a law for 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. This is the foundation for our energy transition. And now our work before us is to ensure that that transition we build out is just, is equitable, and that it empowers people and not corporations. Because sure, we could pass 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040, but how we go about doing that is a huge stake. at who actually benefits and who actually can get the support that they need. The third category is economic development and just transition. What this is all about is leveraging federal and state funds to speed up that transition to renewable energy and really help support local innovation and workers. And two pieces of legislation that we're just so excited about is one, a solar on all schools bill. There's currently some legislation in place that is trying to get solar on schools, but there's so many restrictions and so many barriers that only a small percentage of schools so far have been able to take advantage of that bill. What we're trying to put through is a solar on all schools, so that literally every single school district in the state of Minnesota can have solar on their buildings, solar arrays, at a rate that they can afford and can help with the community as a whole, not only in reducing pollution for that community, but also with economic benefits because of the savings that come from switching to renewable energy. The second bill example is a little bit out of my wheelhouse, I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna tell you what it's called, and if you are an economic geek, I can put you in touch with people who can tell you more. But it's basically what's called a Climate Innovation Finance Authority. Minnesota CIFA, I guess is what we're calling it. And what this is funding that allows communities, small businesses, and individuals to get financing for green projects. And it opens up financing resources that they otherwise might not have. So for instance, at MNIPL, we have 24 solar projects that we're trying to get in place, that we're working with congregations and small businesses to be able to help them get solar. And we are struggling to get financing for them because these projects are too small to be attractive to traditional banks or traditional financiers. So something like the Minnesota CIFA is a way to aggregate and bring together federal and state and other fundings and provide support so that these smaller projects are able to get the financial backing that they need. The fourth area, regulatory protection for people, land, air, and water. In the midst of climate and equity crises, it is imperative that our regulatory institutions, again, protect our land, water, and people over corporate profits. Two examples for this. We are trying to support the creation of a tribal energy advisory board so that there's more tribal authority over the Public Utilities Commission, the PUC. And another is to advance accountability for the damage that has already happened because of the construction of the Line 3 tar sands pipeline. Those are two examples of more regulatory protection. I know it's not sexy. It's not all that much, you know, like woo, rah, rah, let's get behind that. But these little things like regulatory protections, they're the ones that make such a difference to equity, to inequalities, and in the case of Indigenous rights, to sovereignty that oftentimes just gets completely ignored and run over. And Line 3 is a prime example of that. And the fifth and last category is environmental justice. And this is really an umbrella for all of it, but we call it out specifically because we need to drive change that centers the needs of Indigenous and BIPOC communities and creates economic justice that advances racial justice as climate justice. You cannot have climate justice without considering racial justice. You just can't. The two are intertwined with each other. And so this is the work that's before us, to rise up and to repair what we have broken. One of the youth activists that is on staff at MNIPL, her name is Michaela Freeman. She is now a freshman at the Minneapolis Community College studying social work, I believe. And she was at the rally. She spoke and she issued what I think is a beautiful summary of our call before us. In her words, she said, "We should make sure everyone has access to these better futures, where renewable energy powers our lives, where communities make the decisions about their own environments, and where we participate in the economic benefits of this energy revolution." I think those are our youth, right? That's our youth. And it's our responsibility too, right? This isn't just for us to put on the youth. This isn't for just us to put on people like Michaela Freeman, who I get to work with. This is all of our collective responsibility. There's no blame involved in this. There's no shame involved in this. This is just a calling forth for us to rise up and do the repair and do the work. To bring about renewal of the world, here's what our call is as people of faith, as people of conscience, as people who ground their lives in values. We can look to the depths of our compassion for ecological compassion. When we put our hands on the earth and in its waters, not as natural resources valued for their usefulness or even their beauty or nourishment, but as a fundamental affirmation for the interdependent web of all existence for which we are a part. This seventh principle, as we know it now within Unitarian Universalism, is a touchstone for the spiritual and ethical responsibilities we carry for ecological restoration, for this commitment that we make to creation, to all the human and non-human and life-giving and life-saving elements of this world. The earth teaches us the power of resiliency, of regrowth, and of emergence. It roots us and moves us. It brings us back to this place, back to wonder and gratitude, back to possibility. It is never static. It is always moving, and we are like the hummingbird. We pick up a drop of water, we do what we can, and we know that there are hummingbirds all around us who are picking up their drops of water too. That is the collective action that we can do that really makes a difference. I want to close today with a poem by Joy Harjo of the Muskogee Creek Nation. It is the first of 6 parts in a poem called Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings, and I'm just reading the first part, but the poem is amazing if you ever have a chance to go find it. This first part: set conflict resolution ground rules. Recognize whose lands these are on which we stand. Ask the deer, turtle, and the crane. Make sure the spirits of these lands are respected and treated with goodwill. The land is a being who remembers everything. You will have to answer to your children and theirs. The red shimmer of remembering will compel you up the night to walk the perimeter of truth for understanding. As I brushed my hair over the hotel sink to get ready, I heard, by listening, we will understand who we are in this holy realm of words. Do not parade, pleased with yourself. You must speak in the language of justice. Blessed be, and amen.